Hello everyone. So we are going to be putting together the album for the flight bag. And I'm going to cover how I covered the chipboard pieces for the cover of the album, and then I'm going to go into the buckle assembly and some page construction. So the first thing I did was I took two 12 by 12 pieces of cardstock that I'm using for the cover. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to marry the two pieces together so that I have a larger piece of cardstock to lay out my chipboard pieces on. So you just want to take your double-sided tape or adhesive, and you want to put a strip down or a bead of glue if you're using white glue. But you want to use something that's nice and strong since you're putting two pieces together. You want to burnish, if you're using tape, that tape down really well. And I probably should have used my little pick to lift that tape off, but eventually you see I got it off. And then I want to make sure that I am straight. So you can use the lines of your mat to help you, but you do want to be straight. And then you want to take the second piece of cardstock and lay it on that outer edge of your tape. And again, if you're doing adhesive, you just want to do a bead of glue, no more than 1/4 of an inch overlap is good enough. And you want to lay that second piece down carefully and straight onto the double-sided adhesive or your adhesive if you're using white glue. Burnish it down really well. You want to make sure you have super good contact because this is going to go over your cover and you don't want those two pieces to come apart. So once you have that done, you want to trim off all the excess. And so you can do that however you wish. I usually use a 1-inch border all the way around my cover cardstock that I'm using. And then I will draw a horizontal line and a vertical line. So the horizontal line, as you can see, runs the full span of my cardstock, and then one vertical line as my reference point to make sure that my chipboard is going to be straight. Once you've done that, you want to apply your adhesive onto your chipboard. This piece is the back, so you want to lay the back first. And what you're going to do is lay this back part of your cover to where that joint that you made by putting the two pieces of cardstock together, you want that to be centered on this back piece of chipboard. And I'm using my line as a reference to make sure I'm straight. And the reason why you want to do it in the center is because you don't want that joint to be compromised if you do it too far to the right or the left. And aesthetically, it looks much better. So you want to go ahead and apply your adhesive onto all of the cover chipboard pieces as I am doing here. Just make sure that if you are using double-sided tape that you burnish really well. If you're using wet glue, I would suggest that you smooth your glue out so that you don't have any bumpy pieces or lumps showing through on your chipboard. I usually just take a wet paintbrush when I'm using wet glue and I smooth out the glue that I've put down on the chipboard pieces, and that usually does the trick. And you just want to burnish really well. So a tip that I have for you, and it'll be up on the screen in just a minute, is that little piece on the right hand side. That is a template that I make to make sure that I have the appropriate gap between each piece of my chipboard. And that is made by marrying two pieces of the same chipboard that you're using for your project together. So there you see the tip. And that's what it looks like. So just keep in mind, it's the same chipboard that you're using for your project, because if you use a different chipboard, then it might be too thick or too thin and you're not going to have the same result. So I just slide the template up and down between each gap just to make sure that I'm nice and straight with the pieces in between. So that back piece and the side piece and then the front pieces are all going to have the same width in between. And this really does avoid having your cardstock crack. A lot of times people talk about their cardstock cracking when they bend their album cover into shape, and that's one of the reasons you're not leaving enough gap in between each of those pieces, and that's why you're getting the cracking, or you could be getting the cracking because of that. So I'm just laying it down and I'm running it back and forth just to really make sure I have even width. Burnish everything down again nicely. Take out any bubbles, any bumps, and I'm going to just trim off a little bit on this one piece. It didn't line up correctly at the top. So then I take my bone folder and I run it around all of the chipboard, and then I trim my corners at an angle. I'm applying my tape to the outer edges of the cardstock, and then I'll take that tape and I'll apply it to the bottom edges and the top and side edges of my chipboard pieces. You don't want to put any adhesive in that gap. You want to leave that gap free of any adhesive. Burnish everything down really well. I take off all of my tape. You can take it off by sections. It's just easier for me. And previously you saw me just gently fold that cardstock around my chipboard. Just makes it a little bit easier when you start to lay the cardstock over onto the inside of your album cover. And so there, I'm just being a little diligent with burnishing everything down. You do want to take your time. I did speed up the video because I didn't need to, I don't think you want to see it go in regular motion. You kind of get the gist of what I'm doing here. So you just take your end of your bone folder and you fold those little corners in, and then you get a nice crisp edge on your cover. And I like to take my bone folder and I like to flatten out the outer edges of my chipboard. Gives it a cleaner look. Now let's make some pages. So I just did a quick look at how my layout's going to look. I've already attached my spines or fins for the pages. You're going to want to follow the instructions and fold your paper accordingly. And then to attach the flap, you're just going to add some adhesive to that scored section. I rounded my corners of this flap, and then you're going to slide it in so that your fold is at the top and you're just slightly below that scored line. Burnish down really well with your bone folder. Make sure you have really good contact, and you want to fold your flap over and then burnish down one more time. And this way your flap will open and close nice and easy. That left section is what we're going to use to attach our pages to our album, and I'm showing you that here. You're going to attach that section onto your hinge fin or whatever you're using, and that will be glued down. So let's talk about the buckle and strap. So again, I'm using Tim Holtz buckle here, and I'm applying some glossy accents. Glossy accents really holds well. You can use whatever strong adhesive you have. I've punched a hole into my KRAFTEX, and I'm applying a large brad onto it. So that gives it a little bit of added security on your KRAFTEX and your metal buckle. And then I'm flattening out the prongs of my brad. You want those nice and flat. I've already punched the holes onto the opposite end of the strap, and now what I'm doing is going to be covering up that prong with a little piece of KRAFTEX. So you can just cut off a little piece of the KRAFTEX, the same width as your strap, and then you're going to want to glue that on top of your prongs from your brad. And that's what I'm doing right here. And when you do this, you may want to go ahead and use a binder clip or some type of clamp to hold the two pieces down to make sure it's nice and stuck really well onto that metal part of your prongs. And set that aside and go ahead and let that dry. Glossy accents really doesn't take a long time to dry, but you do want to make sure it's nice and dry before you start applying this onto your album cover. So next thing I want to do is decide my pieces for my back of my cover. And again, if you didn't catch it and if I didn't show it, I am using Cartabella's Metropolitan Girl paper collection. It comes with cut aparts, it comes with double-sided 12 by 12 papers and a 12 by 12 sticker sheet. Super fun, very chic, hip, modern twist on I don't know, I think it's a very fashionable themed paper. It certainly can be used for travel, like the flight bag that I have here, but it could be used for other things. So if you don't have your hands on this one, it's a really great paper collection. I like the papers because they're nice and thick. They're not, and they have a bit of a texture to them, so really like it. So what you need to do is find your placement for your strap. And so I'm just making sure that I have enough strap length to wrap around the album back and then onto the front. So I decided to keep the cityscape of this paper at the bottom of my album, and then I'm using some coordinating papers from the collection for the center upper part of that back section. I just think it's really fun, and when you bring the album together, which you'll see in a little bit, you'll see that the two sides come together and continue that cityscape on there. So just centering my matte pieces. You can choose to use a full whole piece for your back cover in each of the sections, but since I'm going to be adhering the strap to the back, I decided to go ahead with two separate pieces for that center back piece. As always, you just want to take your bone folder and smooth everything down, making sure everything is gonna stay stuck on there nice and smooth. And then I'll go ahead and continue on to adding that second piece onto the back center section of my cover. Speeding up the video just a little bit, continue to lay your matte pieces down onto the back of your chipboard, and then what you're going to do is make sure that you are relatively center on that front, because what we're going to do next is we're going to use some brads to attach the strap onto the back of the album. So I'm buckling it here just to make sure I have the correct center placement. And for me, since I use two pieces, I want to make sure that that buckle is straddling the two pieces that I put together. I'm going to add a little bit of double-sided tape down to help stabilize my placement before I put my brads down. It's kind of tricky to do that if you don't have anything that's really holding down the the KRAFTEX. So then what I'm doing is I'm finding center so that I can find a placement to punch my holes for my brads, and then putting the brads all the way through. And you want to make sure that your brads are long enough that they're going to go through your chipboard and your cardstock, and then also use a tool to make sure those brads are nice and flat. So here I'm just continuing to add my mats onto the front section, and then the side section, and then subsequently the two outer sides there. All right, so I'm just finishing up adding the final pieces to the back of my album, and then I'm just going to check placement on my strap one more time, smoothing everything out. It's really important to make sure you smooth and burnish everything. So then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of tape to the side of my strap so that I can adhere that to the cover.